Hi everyone. Now we get started. Welcome to the second of 6 webinars of the FABULOS Academy of the FABULOS project. My name is Renske Martijns. I work for Forum Virim Helsinki. We coordinate the FABULOS project. You can find a bit more information on the project via fabulos.eu. For now, I think most of you will have heard about it. Maybe it's enough to say that this project revolves about autonomous driving and specifically automated shuttles for public transport, for last mile public transport in cities. We have 6 cities and procuring partners involved in our cities and 5 consortia that we currently work with. And the cities that are involved in the project, and of course cities around the globe, have increasingly have to deal with all kinds of mobility innovations such as autonomous driving. And the staff and people involved in pilots and tenders, they don't always know everything about this. Now, not everyone needs to know all the details, but the fundamentals are, it's essential to know something about those. So, for example, on sensors or positioning or cybersecurity, charging, and of course also the legal side of things. So that's why we have organized this FABULOS Academy to kind of bridge this knowledge gap, and that's why today's session is dedicated to regulatory aspects. So shortly to introduce our speaker of today, Eetu Pilli-Sihvola from Traficom, the Finnish Transport and Communications Agency. He is one of the Finnish experts related to regulations surrounding automated mobility, and he will go a bit into if the regulations that are there, if they are ready for automated mobility, and also speak about legislation and liability and a look to the future as well. So Eetu, welcome and thank you. Before I give the floor to you shortly, for the people who are listening, there's afterwards a possibility for questions. You can type them in the comment box of the GoToMeeting. Or just speak up afterwards. Please stay muted during the presentation, and we are of course recording this, and the recording will be made available afterwards. So for you now 45 minutes, and then shortly some Q&As.
All right, sounds perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And hello everyone. So let's get on the topic of the day. So I will talk a bit about automated mobility regulations, and then also with the side of ethics that was not yet mentioned here, but we'll get to those. And I would like to start with maybe a bit of a different approach to automated mobility and to the question of what are the impacts of automation to different transport jobs. So we hear a lot of talk about addressing the issue of driver shortage with automation and also kind of improving the efficiency. But this was kind of a nice thing I came across from a Finnish news reporter. This is a picture from China where in the buses, in addition to drivers, they also have what is called bus shouters. So they have employees in the bus shouting every time the bus leaves a stop or turns in an intersection. And I've understood that this is one of the reasons for this is that in China, in traffic, the turning party is the kind of first go-to in terms of liability. So they have kind of address this issue using a very manual solution instead of automation. I think the bus shouter is also, you could perhaps think of automated solutions, but this is still common today there. But this is kind of, for me at least, this was a nice thought awaker to what are the different issues to address by automation. But to get more on the topic, I will first talk a bit about automation as a concept, so the different levels, and maybe more importantly the operational design domains, which is an approach to automation that helps dig deeper into the kind of issues that we need to address with relation to specific automation use cases. So if you're talking about automated shuttles or urban automation, this is something that will help in planning the operations. Then we'll look at road traffic legislation, law issues relating to automated vehicles based on an Interreg project, Soja Baltic, and the results there and the discussion that was had there. And we'll also address liability issues, and I'll also give a brief outlook on what is the current estimate on how automation will take up, how different types of automation will kind of become more common and at what time. And then short ending on the ethics issue and the trolley problem that is often mentioned in this context. But to talk first about the SAE levels of automation, you have the levels from 0 to 5, with 0 being fully manually driven vehicles, and then level 5 would be fully automated in every condition, in every traffic circumstance. And the level 5 is something that is still really, really far out there if you look at what kind of can be realistically accomplished. But then level 4 is mostly where the automated shuttles fall. So it is full automation with no real expectation that the driver will do any active control, but in a limited environment or in limited conditions. And this is another way to look at it. So this is from SAE. The organization's been working on the levels of automation. And here you can see kind of a couple of important things when you think about the automation levels. So there is a big difference between level 2 and level 3. So when you talk about level 2 or level 1, it's just driver support, and the driver needs to be in active control and monitor of the vehicle at all times. So what is currently being sold on the kind of passenger car, heavy goods vehicle side, this is still basically level 2. And the question is, how feasible will level 3 be? Because on level 3, then basically the car would drive itself most of the time, but then at some situations or when it malfunctions, it would request the driver to take over. And this could be even with a very kind of small time to take control. So you could have only seconds to kind of regain your situational awareness and then be able to take control of the vehicle. And this is one topic that's kind of still a lot of work and a lot of development going on. So what is feasible to do in a level 3 kind of way? So what can you expect realistically from a driver if he or she is kind of completely off the loop during highway driving, and then at some point, say after 30 minutes of driving, the system would request him or her to take over? Then how can that be done in a safe way? But on the automated shuttles, urban solutions, we're talking more about level 4, which is in a way, it's simpler, and it's simpler because you also limit the conditions where the vehicles, automated shuttles in this case, operate. So there is no expectation that the driver in real time is ready to take over. You can, of course, then have remote monitoring, remote control of the vehicle, but that's kind of another thing. So when you design the systems for level 4 vehicles, for automated shuttles, the expectation is that it should do quite well by itself in the environment where you plan it to operate. And this leads us to the concept of operational design domain, or ODD, that is often used. Often used in discussing the more specific issues you have, both with the technology and also with the environment in which you want to use the vehicles. So the example we have here is of a kind of a highway autopilot system. So it's from the passenger vehicle side. But the basic idea behind the operational design domain that there are limitations to the system. So this applies quite well to level 4 systems. So there are limitations. They can be related to the type of road the system will work. Here it is highway. Or they can be related to the weather conditions. So in heavy rain or in snowy conditions or in slippery conditions, the system would not work. And if the operational design domain is very narrow, you get this problem here. So you really have a lot of points where the control between the vehicle and the driver is transferred. And we know that this is really problematic, especially when it occurs often, and especially when it's not necessarily always clear what the reason behind this is. So to kind of help, for example, in planning for automated shuttle type operations, you can look at the different ODD attributes that could limit the system in some way. So we already mentioned the road types, then speed range is another thing. In an urban environment, it works only in areas with 30 kilometers an hour or 40 kilometers an hour limits. Then it might require a specific type of shoulder, curb, specific width. It could have limitations related to road markings, to traffic signs, and to different road furniture, road equipment around the road, or traffic, time, weather conditions, also the kind of communications that's available. If the requirement is to have a real-time monitoring for the vehicle, then you of course need quite reliable communication for it. Okay, and then in addition to the automation levels and the ODDs, operational design domains, when you talk about automated mobility, automated driving in particular, you should always remember that there are really a number of different types of automation that you can be talking about. And you should be quite specific in what you're considering or what you're talking about, because the issues related to the different types of automation, they can be very different. So you have the traditional type, you have kind of urban shuttles, then you can have robotaxi type of service, which could be close to the urban shuttles. Then you have heavy goods vehicles, platooning, and these kinds of issues. And of course, kind of recent additions, these kind of small automated delivery vehicles or delivery devices that typically move around pedestrians and cyclists. But the issues are different for each of those. All right, so that's kind of the talking about concepts of automation and the different issues related to those. Next, we will take a brief look into the legislative side. Where do the laws and rules, traffic rules, come from? And if you simplify things a bit or quite a bit depending on who you ask, you can basically talk about two aspects. You can talk about the use of vehicles in traffic, and then about the vehicle systems themselves, how you manufacture them, what kind of technical requirements the vehicles have. So if we look at the use of vehicles in traffic, then the basic rules of the road come from the international conventions on road traffic, so Geneva Convention and the Vienna Convention from 49 and 68 respectively, which are managed by the United Nations Economic Committee, European Committee for Economy, and the Working Party 1, where their objective task is to harmonize traffic rules and road safety. Then the different regulations related to use of vehicles in road traffic are prepared in the European Commission, and mostly in different groups under DG Move. Then on the kind of vehicle requirement side, it's another part of the UNECE Working Party 29, which then comes more into play. But you can kind of the twofold aspect of how to use vehicles in traffic, how to operate in traffic in a safe manner. That's one side, so traffic rules, and then vehicle regulations on the other side. And on the traffic rules side, last October, the UNECE kind of published a resolution on the deployment of highly fully automated vehicles with regard to road traffic. And this kind of non-binding legal resolution, but that is intended to be a set of guidelines to the safe deployment of highly automated vehicles. And this is something that's already meant to be updated on the way when work is done, kind of looking into how traffic rules need to adapt when the concept of vehicle is changing, so that there's not always a driver in full control of the vehicle. So there are a lot of things that kind of come into play when the whole concept changes a bit, and especially the relationship between the driver and the vehicle. So there's not that clear when compared to the kind of traditional aspect that there's always a driver who drives the vehicle manually. And there's a lot of points in the recommendations that we're not going to go through, but are here if you want to then look at them in more detail, and also the link to the resolution is found because it's available online. But you can kind of look at what kind of recommendations they agreed upon in October. So very kind of top level things, so making road safety a priority, complying with traffic rules, and then they also talk about the only operating within their ODD, meaning that vehicles should only operate within the operational design domain that they are designed to operate in. So again, operating, taking into account the limitations of the systems. So this is something that is very kind of a fundamental principle also in applying or deploying these vehicles. So you need to be really, really well aware of what the limitations are. If you know the limitations, then there's a lot you can do, but it's really important to know your ODD, so to say. All right, we're not going to look at this. And then just kind of also recommendations directly to governments, so kind of promoting public awareness and understanding of the safe use of highly fully automated vehicles. So this is also one thing that has proven to be really important, kind of improving public awareness and improving how the public, how people understand automated vehicles, and that they also know what the limitations of the different vehicles are. All right, so this is now kind of an organizational view on where the vehicle side of the regulations are worked on currently as we speak as well. So in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, and under the Inland Transport Committee, or the ITC, is the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations, and which meets 3 times a year. And the good thing about the kind of UNECE work on the regulations and also on the traffic rules is that the documentation and the working papers, all the material is freely available online at the UNECE website. So I would encourage you to kind of go there and also take a look at how the different topics are discussed and what is being worked on right now. And this is also something, if you're interested, and there's one problem with this is that there is really a lot of material on the website and it's not always easy to find. So if you're really interested in this in more detail, feel free to contact me at a later time so I can kind of give you a few pointers on where to find maybe the most relevant things depending on what you are interested in. So maybe one more point on the Working Party 29. They have a subgroup which is called the Working Party on Automated Autonomous Connected Vehicles, and the short name for that is the GRVA. And this is now the group where the different issues related to vehicle regulations and automated vehicles are being worked on. So they have kind of tried to collect it in the GRVA group, which then has additional sub-working groups, of course. But this is kind of the focal point of, so if you look at what is going on at GRVA, you will see kind of the latest on this. And currently they're working on issues cybersecurity recommendations for manufacturers of automated vehicles or manufacturers of automated vehicle systems. And they're also working on cybersecurity related to over-the-air updates. So updates that kind of are done over the air, over Wi-Fi, how to address the different cybersecurity issues in those. All right. So that was kind of the top level look on how globally and in Europe, how the traffic rules, vehicle regulations are being worked on and how they're further developed. And then next we will take a look at the kind of a legal implementation roadmap. We'll look at a few topics there that are specifically related to using automated vehicles as part of a public transport service. And this was done in the Sohjoa Baltic project together with a number of partners. The German ICAM was the main responsible for the kind of roadmap part of this, and they did a really good work on this. This was done part of the Interreg Baltic Sea region funding program. So we'll look briefly at vehicle registration, passenger transportation issues, what kind of personal requirements are for a vehicle operator, then maybe data protection and criminal liability issues as well. If you kind of start, so what are the issues with vehicle registration? The starting point in all of the 5-6 participating countries in this study was that all motorized vehicles must be registered before they can be used on public roads. And there are differences in this, but basically the same thing. So if there is something that you cannot yet register in a normal way, for example, some type of automated shuttle that is not yet type approved, then you need to find alternative ways to do that. So the automated shuttles, the biggest issue that they currently have, if you look at the vehicle regulations, are related to the control of the vehicle and the control devices. So when you do not have traditional control devices and the control of the vehicle is implemented in a bit differently, this is something that's not yet fully compliant with vehicle regulations, and this is something that still currently you kind of need to find an alternative road to be able to use it on public roads. But here we come to the Vienna Convention, and the basic requirement that applies today is that every moving vehicle needs to have a driver. And if with automated shuttles you place the vehicle operator, which in this case means the driver of the vehicle in a legal sense, if the vehicle operator is inside the test vehicle, this kind of helps in some countries with some issues, but then there are countries, Finland is one example, Sweden is another, where the vehicle operator can also be positioned outside the vehicle. When then you are basically talking about some type of remote control or remote driving of the vehicle, but this does not change the responsibilities of the driver, even if he or she is outside the vehicle. They're still fully responsible of the safe operation of the vehicle. So this is kind of how things stand today. So if you cannot obtain a regular registration, then you need to have some kind of testing or exception procedure. And within the 6 countries examined here, in each country there was some kind of way to do test operations of the vehicles, special permits or test plate certificates. And then there is also, when you talk about some kind of exemption or some kind of testing permit, you of course need to be more specific in how you will operate the vehicle and in what way the vehicle differs from, for example, the, so to say, traditional vehicle technical requirements. So what are the differences with the type approval requirements? And of course, in testing, traffic safety is always something that you should prioritize. Also kind of the smooth flow of traffic regularly. So you need to take this into account, especially in the planning stage. I think regardless of what kind of technical permit scheme you have here, it's really important to take into account not causing any disturbance in the traffic, because this is also in line with the rules, traffic rules that come from the Vienna Convention. So checklist type of approach helps here. There is probably there is potential in harmonizing the kind of things that are required from someone doing vehicle testing. So kind of comparing notes with neighboring countries or your countries that you do a lot of cooperation with. And then it's also, it would be good to kind of increase the mutual recognition of these national exemptions or national permits, so that if you get a permit to do testing in one country, that would also be kind of mutually recognized by the neighboring country, for example. So it would be easier. You wouldn't have to go through 5 or 6 different exemption processes. Then on the passenger transport side, commercial transportation of passenger requires permit in all countries that were looked at here. It's kind of the normal case. And then in many systems, there is distinction made between a general passenger transportation permit and a taxi type passenger transportation permit. And of course, exceptions to some of those. For the passenger transport permits given to organizations, there are some basic requirements, of course. If you want to do transport passengers, kind of adequate competence in the field of passenger transport was a common nominator, and then, of course, financial technical reliability of the service offered. In some countries, there are much stricter rules on this topic and on others. So this is something where kind of the local implementation and the local legislation can differ quite a lot. So you need to always examine the situation in the country in which you plan to do the passenger transport, because that's the laws that apply in that case. But something that's maybe food for thought also when developing the regulations further, maybe a more flexible legal framework for different types of on-demand service, on-demand transport services, whether they're automated vehicle or not, and then simplifying, balancing the whole process of applying for a permit. For the vehicle operators, the requirements, of course, when the operator is always still the driver, then the driver needs to have a driving license that fits with the type of vehicle that they are operating or driving in a legal sense. So length and weight of the vehicle, number of passengers, so the vehicle types. This is also kind of having the driving license for the vehicle type where the vehicle operated falls under. And this is also not a completely kind of clear-cut case because, for example, the automated shuttles, it's not depending on certain design decisions that are made by the manufacturers. There could be some room for interpretation on what kind of vehicle type the vehicle falls under. So is it still a passenger vehicle or is it a bus? So as a kind of one clear distinction that's being discussed, depending on the number of passengers the vehicle is designed to transport. Okay, so the term driver, it's not necessarily literally and legally defined in all countries. So for Finland, Sweden, for example, there's more talk about road user in general and then using passive forms in the legislation. But this is kind of one approach to address the issue that it's not in most cases where you would apply traffic rules in traffic. It's not really important who is doing the driving as long as it's done in a safe manner and according to the rules. So if you do not always specify that you talk about a driver that is described as a person, then that can help kind of on the legal side. But that this is maybe a topic on how you address the issue of automated driving in your national legislation, I would say. So it's for thinking about what kind of words, what kind of logic to use in the legislation. In some countries, in addition to the driving license, the drivers, vehicle operators must obtain a license for passenger transportation separately. And then also related to the behavior of the driver, in some countries there are some specific legal standards, so must remain attentive and must hold hands on the wheel or this kind of thing. So here again, if you're being less specific in the legislation, it will help in the future, because then you do not have to be fully descriptive. You just need to think that this kind of formulation, more general one, kind of driving safely in some situation, will kind of leave more room to see where the technology and where the services develop. Of course, the data protection law is something that applies here as well as in any issue, and there are kind of a lot of processes have been under review due to the adoption of the General Data Protection Regulation. And this is kind of the basic idea when you process any personal data, is kind of having the valid legal grounds to do so. So it could be consent of the subject in question, or then necessity of processing the information. But for automated vehicles, then kind of the use of camera systems in the vehicle is something that could, in some instances, be kind of require some thinking on how you describe what data is collected and how you process the data. So is it stored and for how long, and when is it deleted for good? So also an issue that's good to keep in mind when planning deployment or trials for automated shuttles. On criminal law, most of the countries we looked at did not have any specific criminal legislation for automated driving, and this is not something that is necessarily needed in the future, because the basic concepts here work pretty well. So in most countries, criminal liability may be ascribed to the owner of the vehicle, manufacturer and the employees, provider of the data infrastructure, and then also the officials at the competent vehicle authority responsible for approving the vehicle. So this is something that comes to play only in case something happens, and it's also looked at from a criminal point of view, so whether there is criminal liability or criminal negligence in accidents or kind of other malfunctions. But there's basically the current law on the criminal side, it works pretty well. Liability issues on the European side relies mostly on the product liability law and road traffic law. And this is also something when the operation of the vehicle moves toward the vehicle itself, so the systems and the subsystems in the vehicle that make the decisions on control based on sensors that are also part of the vehicle, then it's also quite natural that the liability moves towards the product that's in operation, of course on the condition that the driver, operator or passenger are using the product in a way it's intended to be used. So the logic here we think is clearly going to shift towards the product liability. And of course regular traffic liability insurance works pretty well for automated vehicles, just as for regular vehicles. So depending on how the system is in your particular country, this is something that gives adequate protection to other road users, so they get compensated for damages, and they necessarily don't care whether it's by an automated vehicle or a manually driven one. So if something happens, compensatory scheme is already in place. So this does not change. With automated vehicles, it changes more than on the side who will be the kind of last in line to pay the compensation, but this doesn't kind of affect the regular people, other people moving in traffic, because the traffic liability insurance gives good protection here. And then briefly about how it's in the US. So the US law system, it's a common law, case law system. So basically the law is derived from judicial decisions, courts and other similar instruments. So kind of based on earlier cases, how they've been ruled. But also on the US side, as kind of legal scholars who have been looking into the liability issues, while they see some issues there, they also think on the US side that this is compatible with the adoption of automated vehicles. So this should not pose too critical an obstacle. Okay, so then to close our lecture part of the broadcast, this is now maybe the most up-to-date look on the timelines on when different types of automated vehicles should be emerging on the market, so that you can acquire them. This is from the EarthTrack Automated Driving Roadmap, which was published 2 weeks ago, and you can find it online. It's a very good document, kind of a basic document. It's kind of short enough to so that it's easy to read, and kind of you get a very good basic information on where automation is and what are the different use cases and what are some of the issues. But if you look at automated shuttles on dedicated roads or kind of some specifically designed routes, then you are here looking at starting from maybe last year, and then going up until 2024. And after that, you could have shuttles that work in kind of on a larger ODD, so in mixed traffic and with some possibilities to implement on-demand services, so that you could kind of, it doesn't have to be a pre-mapped route fully necessarily. So this is maybe from 2024 onwards. And then in Finland we did a study based on the earlier EarthTrack roadmap on, so what is then, how will the share of automated shuttles develop in Finland when you look at the share of sold new buses, if you include shuttles in the bus vehicle category. So this is kind of the estimate we're working on today in Finland. So market introduction would be 26, 27, and then we have low and high scenarios, so that in 2030, maybe a little over 10% of sold new buses would be automated shuttles. The low estimate there is just maybe a couple of percent. And then in 2040, the high estimate would be 40% of new sold buses, and low estimate would be around 15%. So this is kind of the current idea of how it will develop, and we're of course updating this as we get more data every year on how it develops. And then to close up the session, maybe just some short remarks on the trolley problem that is often presented in the context of automated driving. So the trolley problem is that should the vehicle hit a child or an elderly person, or should it hit some person or drive off the cliff? So the basic hypothetical situation always is that you only have two options, and you know exactly what the two options are, and you can act to choose either of those but nothing else. And this is so theoretical a construct that it's not really useful in any sense when you talk about the development of the systems or when you talk about taking them into use, because it's not a situation, it's not a decision situation where that will ever actually occur. And there are kind of a lot of reasons for that also if you think about how people make decisions. It's not in a situation where you have little time, it usually is just a reaction, and you don't have all of the data on the options you have. You don't even know all the options you might have. And this is also the case with automated vehicles. So this is on the right corner, you have kind of the camera view and how the vehicle recognizes different objects. So the vehicle does not see the photo or the video there, it only sees the boxes. It's recognized that this seems to be a person. If you look at the blue box, this seems to be a person. And then the yellow blocks, this is some limiting obstacle here. And the orange cones these seem to be vehicles. But it's always very unsure, and it's always the environment in which a vehicle moves. It's there is a lot of fuzziness in the environment, and it will never be, vehicle systems will never be able to perfectly know the situation around them. There's always a huge amount of uncertainty related to everything. The weather conditions, the sensors, then how you interpret data from the sensors. So there's no situation in which you would know, for example, which persons you have around or what type of persons they are. And in addition, as with all artificial intelligence, privacy is one of the key principles. When you talk about artificial intelligence systems, privacy is one of the key principles that the design of the system should follow. So there is actually no need to try to identify the people around them, because even if you could identify them, it would not be of any use. It would just kind of add to the problem. So there's no motivation to actually go any further than to be as sure as possible whether something is a person or not. But this is something I think it is from the ethics principles that you have, as with any AI solutions. You need to design the systems and use them in a way that's transparent, that there's information on what the logic behind your system and how it operates, how it makes decisions. This does not mean that all the algorithms and the details of the algorithms need to be published, but there needs to be a kind of clear statement on what are the principles your algorithms work based on and what they do not do. So no distinction, no making distinction between people on any personal features. And then do no harm, prioritize human life. This is something that gets you quite far here as well. All right. As a kind of lighter note, this is my final modified cartoon that was also I think you can use this to address a lot of issues, any issue actually related to automated vehicles. So it's really clear that the people who use the systems or people around whom the systems are used, they know how the systems work. So they need to know how they work, they need to know the limitations so that you can avoid overconfidence in the system or kind of misunderstanding of what the system does, what it doesn't do. Or otherwise you could end up in trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Eetu, very much.
Yeah.
For your contribution. Really interesting outcomes.
Yeah.
And next to you, there came one comment.
All right.
Or should I be on the other side? It's okay, like this.
I think it's good.
So I would have a couple of questions. Let's see if the audience has questions. There came at least one comment from Dennis Mika from To Get There in the Netherlands, that he says that it's also possible to safety certify an entire system and not just the vehicle, provided that you can meet a certain safety target, and then you provide a design safety case, and then this can be approved by an independent safety assessor, which is used in the rail industry, for example. What's your view on that?
I think this is one good example on when the vehicle regulations are being worked out. So what will the requirements be for kind of emerging automated vehicle technology? Then at that point you also need to find out what is the best way and also kind of a reasonable way to test the system and for the manufacturer to show that the system works according to the requirements. So this is where you then you have different ways to approach it. So how to show that the system works safely enough. You need to know how safe, what is safe enough, and then figure out the different ways, what are the acceptable ways of showing that the system is safe enough. But this is a good comment, and this is also kind of starting from the safety case and then showing that the system components and the working together are safe. Yeah.
Is this, Dennis, you want to still add something or comment, or this?
No, this is indeed another approach, and I think it's important to, as a customer that ultimately orders these type of systems, to think about, okay, what is safe enough and what safety target needs to be applicable. And then, of course, it's up to the suppliers to demonstrate that they can meet that safety target.
Exactly.
And this is something we actually do already and did already for other systems. So I could say we are experienced with that, and this will also apply for systems on the public road. So, for example, Brussels Airport, where we need to install a system as well. will be safety certified basically in the same way. And then, of course, it's the Belgium regulatory authority, sorry for that, that ultimately gives approval. But basically, the principle is the same.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will put you on mute. Put this on mute for a second. Yeah, and that's of course there's very many levels involved in this whole issue. You mentioned the UNECE, and then there's the national authorities. There's cities involved. I wanted to ask. You mentioned this specific working group from the UNECE, this GRVA, and that they're working on cybersecurity recommendations at the moment. Can you tell a little bit? Do you know what are their next steps? Apparently, they work on kind of certain kind of relatively narrow topics at the time.
Yeah.
So this cybersecurity is the current big thing. What's coming up from that side?
They're working on the cybersecurity, kind of the general guidelines for every type of organization that is developing automated vehicle technology. So the document is quite in the final stages. So I would recommend looking into that, and I think we can actually provide a link to it if we send out something to the participants. And then next they're also working on the automated lane keeping system functionality, but this applies more kind of on the passenger cars. So this is otherwise they're also still planning the priorities because the RVA group started operation in early this year, late last year. Recently. So it's kind of a recent reorganization of the work. Yeah. But this is also something you can see their current thoughts on the priorities on the UNECE website. So if you're interested in how they see the schedule developing right now, you can look on the website.
Well, it's, I guess, of a lot of interest for the development of in this field on what they will come up with. And then on a bit kind of lower level, on the city side, what role do you see for the cities, or what would you recommend for cities, or how can they help? They are of course not in charge of these kind of regulations, but what role could they take?
I think for the cities, the best thing you can do is be active in the planning process. If you see that deploying these types of shuttles in your city is something you see would be worthwhile, then be active in the planning process so that you can kind of take into account the whole transport system of your city, and you can kind of find the places where these types of automated shuttles would be the best use, and also identifying places where there aren't any critical limitations in the infrastructure or in the traffic environment. So that it's not, so to say, the most difficult spot traffic-wise in the city. So kind of comparing whether the type of vehicle you're planning to deploy, whether it works in the routes or the areas where you're planning to use them, and doing this in a thorough way will definitely help, so that then the operation in that on that route would be much more reliable. So you get kind of more out of it.
Makes sense. So basically, deploying pilots and field tests and kind of try it out.
Yes.
As much as possible. Yeah. And what do you think is the biggest challenge in the next, like in the near future, in the next couple of years, for the deployment of these vehicles and the regulations and the whole legal systems related?
I think on the regulation side, I'm pretty confident that the work at the UNECE, both on the vehicle requirement side and then on the traffic rules side, which is the kind of other section of the UNECE, the work there will enable the use of different types of automated vehicles. So there's also a strong, I think there's a strong willingness on the part of the European Commission to kind of help promote the use of these vehicles also in a way that we can quickly address any issues that relate to regulation or testing permits, mutual recognition, that kind of helps then speed up the process of doing pre-deployments and doing the testing. So the Commission has actually launched the single platform on cooperative, connected and automated mobility, and they have an open call for experts, kind of non-member state experts, so from companies, from cities, where you can apply to join and then kind of share in the discussion together with experts and member state representatives in what are the biggest issues and what's the best way to solve them. So I would also...
Didn't it close last week?
Yeah.
The deadline was last week.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the call for experts is constantly open.
Okay.
So you can also join up until the end of the year at least.
And they select 100 people, right?
I think the aim was to get around 100 people there, but it's still it's an open call and you can still apply to kind of join the work. So I would recommend that as well.
Yeah, really good. Is anyone from the audience? If you have another question, then put on your mic or type it in the box. But if not, then let's see if there. I didn't have really anything specific either. I will still. First, I will thank you for your time. Thank you very much, and your clear explanations and your contact details. They will switch to the other slide, and they will be on the screen as well if people want to still ask you something afterwards. From the side of Fabulous, I still wanted to say that we have the third webinar planned already. It will take place on Wednesday, June 19th, on sensors and sensor fusion, etc., sensors on robot buses. It will be presented by Oskar Nistin of Helsinki Metropolia University of Applied Science, and registration takes place through fabulous.eu. So welcome to that. We hope that you like to join for the next webinar too. And as said, this one will be made available online through a website or probably YouTube. We have to put it.
All right.
Eetu, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.